Hi class, my name is Rachel Williams and I will be doing my presentation on how suicide is the leading cause of death in transgender youth. In today's society, the way that adolescents cope with stress is very depressing, and the reason for that being is because they don't have an outlet to let out their emotions. The reason for that being is because their families and peers, if they have any, are not always supportive as they should be. Adolescents struggle with many things like weight, school, bullying, drugs, alcohol, the pressure of how they should succeed in society, and believe it or not, their sexuality and sexual identity also plays a major factor in their stress as well. Adolescents are the years that children begin to find themselves more, along with having a lot more freedom to be themselves. A child begins to develop their sexual identity between the ages of 4 and 6, and they begin to learn this from playtime and their peers. It is not until they get to the years of being able to make their own decisions when they begin to express themselves. When a child struggles to let their loved one know of whom they are in life and what their desire is when it comes to their sexual identity, if they are unsuccessful, they begin to look for ways of self-comfort due to not being able to express themselves. They feel ashamed, and the topic of being a homosexual and or transgender is forbidden within the family. All right, now from being in this class and just being a psychology major, I'm pretty sure that a lot of you know who Sigmund Freud is. Now, Sigmund Freud came up with this theory of the psychosexual stages of development. Now, within those few stages, the two stages that I want to talk about, one start off with the phallic stage. Now, the phallic stage is when a child identifies themselves with male or female. Now, within this time, he also believed that females feel inferior to male due to genital difference, and this is what he calls penis envy. Now, when I was reading this, I thought to myself, I was like, well, he calls it penis envy, and he's talking about how a female child feels inferior to the male, but what if it's the other way around as well? Because this is all just theories. It isn't set in stone. This were his beliefs. So who's to say that a male may not feel inferior to a female because of who she is? And then I also thought to myself, I said, what if this could be somewhat of the beginning of when a child is wanting, to become the opposite sex. But this is all just thoughts. Also, the second stage that I wanted to discuss is a genital stage. Now, problems that emerge from this stage resurface from the early stage, which is the phallic stage. At the genital stage, an adolescent is very aware of who they are and what he or she desires to be. They gain more freedom, dress how they want, and carry themselves how they want. This is when the signs of an adolescent wanting to change their sex are strong and noticeable. And this is when life begins to become very stressful for them. Problems in the school system for transgender youth. Some of the things that they deal with at school can weigh very heavy on them. They deal with bullying, they deal with sexual and physical assault, teasing, harassment, and even cyberbullying. Now, with cyberbullying, that includes things like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, just things of that nature. And they go on these websites and they'll sit there and they'll have a whole timeline of basically teasing someone. So it's like they deal with it at school, then they leave school, they're in their phone, and then what do you see? Someone talking about you, a picture posted of you, and everybody's making fun of you, and it's just like, when do they ever get a chance to escape the bullying? All right, so here I'm about to read a few statistics on transgender youth. Um, and starting off, 10% were threatened or injured with a weapon on school property. 34% were bullied on school property. 28% were bullied electronically, and that goes back to how we were discussing about the cyberbullying. 23% who dated and ended up being in the relationship for a year experienced some type of sexual dating violence within that year. 18% experienced physical dating violence. 18% of those students have been forced to have sexual intercourse at some point in their lives. So as you can see, for you to be, in middle school or high school and just to be constantly dealing with this, it begins to weigh heavy on them. And then of course, if you're being bullied at school every day, of course you're going to not want to go to school. And they say that missing school has also been tied to low graduation rates with transgender youth, which can have a lifelong consequence if they don't finish. Now, there aren't just problems within the school system and society for a transgender teen. Sometimes there's problems within the home, and that comes from families not accepting it, them being judgmental, their emotional, there's emotional and verbal abuse. The family disowns them. The feeling of disappointment from parent to transgender child. And then also depending on what the family's beliefs are and their morals, sometimes religion plays a part in it as well. A transgender teen in society deal with many things. It doesn't just have to come from the places that they normally are all the time. Sometimes they could be out on the street and things like rape could happen, hate crimes, and sexual and physical assault. So it's like it's everywhere they go. Suicide is the leading cause of death in transgender youth. When a transgender teen has not been accepted by loved ones in society, it begins to weigh heavy on them, as I said earlier. And that's when depression develops, what eventually turns into suicide because they can't bear life anymore. And then they just get this feeling of like, why do I want to be here? Why do I want to be here when nobody loves me, nobody accepts me, and I'm getting talked about and talked down about constantly every day? All right, so when you compare the rate of a transgender adolescent who die of other causes versus suicide, suicide deaths are much at a higher rate. And this is the leading cause of death in youth. 30% of adolescents try to attempt suicide at least once in their lives, and the other 42% of adolescents had caused harm to themselves, such as cutting themselves or taking an overdose of medication. The Centers of Disease and Control and Prevention say that nearly 1/3, which is 29% of the LGBT youth, attempt suicide at least once compared to a heterosexual child, which is only 6%. So that says a lot. And this is why, I believe that, suicide is the leading cause of death in transgender youth. And I'm not surprised that it's higher than just a regular teenager. And I really shouldn't use the term regular, but I should say heterosexual teenager. But I'm not surprised because, everybody deals with stress and everybody, has problems. But think about a transgender teenager versus a heterosexual teenager. There's going to be, more problems with a transgender child. Another thing other than suicide that happens with the transgender child, they also, cause self-harm. We also know that transgender youth are not only struggling with depression, but their mental state as well is due to their mental state as well, due to the fact that not only are they trying to kill themselves, but they are self-harming themselves as well. And that is just as important because self-harm is a step before suicide. When you're depressed and when you're going through it, you know, some people start cutting themselves or they start taking medication. And then when that's not enough, then it's like, I have to revert to something else. So, as I was saying, not only are they trying to kill themselves, but they are self-harming themselves as well. And that is just as important because self-harm is a step before suicide. They go from wanting a temporary fix to a permanent fix, believing that if they remove, and then they have this, I read an article where it stated about how sometimes, you know, how I was saying how it becomes a mental issue. Um, I was reading something where it says that sometimes they believe that if they remove a body part, that it will solve their problems. Um, they feel like, you know, well, it all becomes mental, and they feel like, okay, well, maybe if I remove my breast, or maybe if I remove my genitals, you know, they feel as though, you know, they aren't who they don't want to be. And think about statistics on how many transgender youth attempt to commit suicide and are not successful. I mean, seriously, the suicide rate would be much higher than it is now if they were successful. Um, when it comes to a transgender youth, sometimes support is really all they need. You know, of course, they're not going to go through life and everything's going to be okay because somebody is going to come at them with some type of backlash or ridicule, you know, or a joke or bullying. And, you know, getting support from your family can literally mean the world. For parents with the transgender youth, it is in their best interest to be supportive of them from the beginning so that they adjust as comfortably as they can throughout their younger years. Counseling for both parties together and separately should be done. They should definitely have open discussions, and the parents should be very, very attentive of their transgender child because you don't want them to become another statistic. And what I mean is them committing suicide. You know, hopefully for the transgender community, they can live their lives comfortably. You know, no child should be put in a position where they can't bear life due to people bullying them and raping them and, you know, verbally and physically abusing them, you know, and any type of harassment, you know, because that's going to push them to wanting to commit suicide. But if you're anyone, you know, are suffering with living as a transgender, contact 1-800-273-8255 to save a life. And thank you for bearing this presentation with me. I hope you all enjoy. Thank you, and that's the end.